Hello world of YouTube and welcome to my birthday! I turned 29 today. One step closer to 30, baby. And in celebration of that, I'm going to be talking about my top 20 favorite records from the year I was born, 1992. Now you may be wondering, why not save that for next year when you turn 30? Well, I've got something else special planned for next year, ya goobers. And if you caught this live on the marathon on Tuesday, thank you so much for swinging by the marathon and for watching this video then. But either way, here's my top 20 favorite records that came out in 1992. Dream Theater's colossal sophomore outing, Images and Words. Now, I've talked about their third record, their follow-up to this, Awake, and a classic breakdown, but this record is also another 90s prog gem. You know, not only because of the epic Pull Me Under, but also because of the other epics like Take the Time or Metropolis Part 1. I even like the softer moments like the leads on Another Day or the softness in Surrounded. I love the weird sounds, or at least very dated, but also well-executed sounds on the closer Learning to Live. I like how full a lot of the mix sounds on this project. It's a well-produced prog rock jam that, if you're a fan of Dream Theater, you either love or hate this record. I don't really know the general consensus of this record with modern Dream Theater fans, but I feel like if you're of a certain age, you hold this record to a higher regard, and there's a reason for that. It's still got really tight writing, really grand crescendos, and just a nice utilization of expanding that 90s, or that prog sound into the 90s incredibly well. It's a hell of a time, and I really feel like if you enjoy this style of music, you understand why it's on this list. And similarly to Images and Words, fans of a certain scene really hold Las Exorcisto Double Music Volume 1 to a higher regard. And I would argue it's one of White Zombie's best works, for sure. You know, the sample work on here is very heavy, but fits the whole grindhousey style that the band had at their core. While I don't think their early work is bad, I feel like because this came out and was made at the perfect time, they found a way to just make their sound fit that transition of like grungy or aesthetic that was happening in the mainstream into their sound incredibly well. You know, not only with groovy laden tracks like Thunderkiss 65 or Black Sunshine or Cosmic Monsters Inc. or Thrust, but even with some just that bombastic riff work that has that sort of hazy stoner feel that they pretty much are known for as well, like on the opener Welcome to Planet Motherfucker or Soul Crusher that weaves the samples, again, into the track so incredibly well. It's very sample heavy, it's very groovy, it's very dirty, and again, it's a gem in its scene for sure. Not my favorite record by White Zombie, but I feel like it's a point where they were really nailing it on the head with consistently delivering across a project. I love Sade, man, and I feel like her blend of smooth, soulful pop, almost trip-hop at points style on Love Deluxe is so very good. The production is very much sort of indebted to its time, and that's kind of an error of the era that this was birthed from. But I feel like a lot of that atmosphere has aged really well if you're into the whole vaporwave scene. Hell, the piano leads on I Couldn't Love You More or Kiss of Life, I feel like could be great offshoots that would burgeon from the Wii Sports soundtrack. This is a cool-ass record that has some smooth singing from Sade, some really just airy, well-textured instrumentals, and a good groove whenever it wants to get groovy. And furthermore, that trip-hop vibe really does come in some early instances, like on tracks like Feel No Pain, Cherish the Day. The drum production and the overall vibe of that tracks and her vocals on it just suit that scene that would be much more prominent as the decade went on. It has some good seeds planted here, and it's, again, just a lush, well-constructed, soulful, smooth experience. You know, I feel like people are really mean to Fear of the Dark because it is an incredibly underrated project in their discography. And it's not just because the title track goes toe-to-toe with some of their great closers they've had in their catalog, but I mean, Be Quick or Be Dead is an incredible opener. Wasting Love is such a great moment. Fear is the Key has this sinister, lumbering edge, and Chains of Misery has a nice groove at its core as well. People sleep on Fear of the Dark, and I feel like it's definitely a gem in Maiden's discography by and large. Some would say, if you don't like the Dickinson Return era, it's the last great Iron Maiden album, because it was the last with Dickinson before he left and Blaze came in, but it's a hell of a way to end out what was initially the first Dickinson era. And I feel like it has that same grandiosity they're known for while pillaging forth into different ideas to sort of fit the times that were changing in the scene. And I feel like they handled it incredibly well because of their sinister songwriting. I dig this record a lot. And again, I feel like if you're sleeping on it, you should change that. Hip-hop was in a weird place in the early 90s, and you'll see me talk about hip-hop here and there in different pockets, but P-Rock and CL Smooth's Mecca and the Soul Brother sees them continuing to just craft some jazz rap excellence with some incredibly lush, smooth, sample-filled production with some great horn arrangements. And again, CL Smooth's just really smooth, creamy delivery melds with Pete Rock's Ace's production all across the board on this project.
You know, whether he's telling a good story like on For Pete's Sake or on They Reminisce Over You, a dedication to Troy, and the acronym Troy, really well laid out, or just getting in the cut with some good, vivid wordplay like on Straighten It Out or Ghettos of the Mind. The wordplay on here and the rhyme schemes are vintage, classic, tight as fuck.
You know, when the groove finally settles in on the opener, you know that you're just in for this incredibly chill vibe journey that comes through on so many prospects on the project, whether it's the nice lush flutes that come in on Lots of Lovin', or They Reminisce Over You, which was a colossal single from this project that has a sample that's been sort of interwoven into modern alternative jazz-laden hip-hop. This record was one of those foundation projects that you could see a lot of people building off of in their own ways. And I really enjoy this project. And if you like jazz rap and you haven't really checked out any of Pete Rock and CL Smooth's work that they did, this is an instant classic that I feel like you could see so many different people pull from inspiration-wise. You know, track after track, the pockets just are tight, the horns sting at the right times, and that groove is embedded all throughout this project. It's a classic. While not the diamond, colossal, mega, gargantuan selling project that Metallica's Black Album was, Megadeth's Countdown to Extinction still sees them gracefully embracing some of the ideas that some of their contemporaries were doing when welcoming into the 90s. You know, they still keep a lot of that heaviness, that potency that was seen on their earlier thrash-laden work. They just scale it back a little bit. It's not quite as throttling and pummeling by and large. They still keep the intensity there, though, on tracks like Skin on My Teeth and Symphony of Destruction, which has some incredible lead work, or even keep doubling down on that politically charged lyricism that Dave Mustaine is known for with tracks like those, and the other big single from here, Sweating Bullets. They also find ways to get softer in ways that seemingly production-wise embrace what some of their contemporaries doing, like Captive Honor and Foreclosure of a Dream, that see them embracing more acoustics while having that reverb-centric atmosphere that definitely felt very ballad-esque. I still think comes across incredibly well. While its back end isn't quite as beefy as its front end, it's still a great record by and large from these guys, and I feel like still was a successful transition into what would be a still relatively consistent decade for them in the 90s. You know, I even dig tracks like High Speed Dirt and Psychotron that coat the back end because of their heavy riff work and some of their just, again, gargantuan scale that I feel like they embraced incredibly well. Not their best, but still a damn fine record. I've never really talked about Tom Waits, but I really like Tom Waits' work, and maybe one day I'll sit down and talk about his catalog as a whole, but Bone Machine was his transition into the 90s, similarly to some of the other acts I've talked about, and Tom just got even weirder. He got more eccentric. He got he really started to double down on some of the eccentricities and accompaniment or just overall production styles that coded tracks like Swordfish Trombone. But he channeled it less in like the jazzy or piano rock centric style or piano ballad centric style, and he more doubled down on guitar blues in a way that I think suits him incredibly fucking well. You know, he still has his weirdness, like on The Earth Died Screaming, or the production sounds on All Stripped Down, or the presentation on In the Coliseum. But there are also tracks like Who Are You This Time, which have this lo-fi, almost early Beck production style, that have, again, a much more focus on guitar blues. Or That Feel, the closer, which has Keith fucking Richards on it, of all people, that sees him, again, channeling that guitar, rootsier blues sound in a really meaningful way. I like Bone Machine a lot. It's not my favorite Tom Waits record, but it's one I hold to a pretty high regard. And I feel like out of an artist who was already kind of eccentric, transitioning into a decade full of eccentricities and goofballs and oddballs, this was the best compilation of songs I feel like he could have pulled together and pulled it off so incredibly well. Even though it feels kind of like a jarring experience jumping from his last record to this one, if you look at his pantheon of his discography, this fits so snugly in there with it's just classic jams, and it's, again, nice utilization of different production styles across the experimentations on here. That you made me die. It took my hand, it killed me. And Apollo 18 by They Might Be Giants is sort of cut from a similar cloth. It sees the guys getting out there, more and more out there, doubling down on their eccentricities while having some more sonic accompaniment in there, like the horns and stuff on the guitar, which in and of itself is a funk jam and interpolates the Lion Sleeps Tonight in its core. Again, really fucking weird and niche. You've also got these smaller songs, not micro songs, I'll get to that in a minute, but you got these smaller songs in the form of like the jazz-filled Spacesuit, the organ-filled Which Describes How You're Feeling, or the delay-filled Hypnotist of Ladies, and with all those small songs and weird accompaniments across the project, you've also got the Fingertip Suite, a bunch of micro songs pulled together into one package that is like one of my favorite things They Might Be Giants have ever done. This album has so much weirdness going on. You've even got like the lumbering Western-esque Hall of Heads and other sort of genre experimentation, on top of some other well-constructed, tight They Might Be Giant-style jams in the form of like I Palindrome I, or My Evil Twin, or The Statue Got Me High. You know, it's a good expansion on their foundation while doubling down on the weirdness and, again, eccentricities that they were already showcasing on their records prior. It's a classic Giants record that definitely is a good, again, transition into a decade of weirdness. If you believe they put a man on the moon. Seemingly a bounce back from one of their weirder offshoots in their discography, Automatic for the People sees them channeling that big sound that was on a lot of the choruses in their late 80s and Out of Time's catalog, and seeing how big of a room they could make that sound fit to increase the scale even farther. You know, there's a lot of reverb on this project, but I feel like it's done purposefully, and the band still retains that scale that they had been building up to over the last couple of releases, harnessed incredibly well on this project. You know, obviously the singles on this project, Everybody Hurts and Man on the Moon, are great, and they actually showcase that scale in two different ways, whether emotional gravitas or through just tight, by the numbers, by their standards, rock, alternative sounds that has great chorus work on it at its core. And that extends into tracks like the opener Drive, or the Sidewinder Sleeps Tonight, or Night Swimming. You know, they also have some really cool instrumentation work, like on the keys of the New Orleans Instrumental No. 1, which has this synth tone that just hits me so very well. I love that organ sound so very much. And it feels like a lot of the sounds in this record feel like they were setting a foundation for pockets of the alternative scene to certainly build from throughout the 90s. That's kind of evident if you listen to this record and see what follows it. But I feel like it's a good point in their catalog where they also sort of tried to experiment with making softer, slower moments work for them. Whether it's through strings like on Sweetness Follows or some of the harmonica tones on Monty Got a Raw Deal. The band overall is just firing off on some more consistent cylinders than Out of Time and made a genuine classic out of it. Obviously, I can't talk about the 90s without talking about grunge. But a lot of the big grunge records that like helped burgeon the scene into the mainstream came out in 91. In 92, though, we got the dirtiest, grittiest grunge record in the form of Dirt, Alice in Chains' follow-up to their debut record, Facelift, that sees them making their guitar so muddy and thick while having this beautiful pairing of their vocal harmonies of Lane Staley and Jerry Cantrell used to great effect and pairs really well with some of that dirtiness, whether it is tracks like The Sinister, Them Bones, that carries into some of the sinisterness on Rain When I Die, some of that throttling groove on Sick Man, or even used well in an acoustic sense, like on Rooster. That track is haunting as fuck. You know, the band sees them channeling all of that really well, while also going for bigger choruses and continuing to beef up their sound like their contemporaries had, like on the 1-2 punch closer of Angry Chair and Wood, a track that has a lumbering bass groove that, again, sits really well in the dirty core that this record has going for it. I love this project. It's not my favorite grunge record, but it is definitely the grungiest grunge record that has ever grunged. You know, and I feel like it's while grunge as a genre sort of looked at in weird, you know, eyes, depending on how you view rock as a whole, records like this showcase its importance and what it did to not only help its scene, but other scenes that I'll talk about with much higher spots on the list. But Dirt is genuinely a great alt-grunge gem that, again, it just makes you feel filthy while listening to it. Now, I didn't originally realize this when I was pulling my list together, but when it was all finalized and I looked at the next 3 spots, I realized they all had a similar overall cohesive theme to them. And you'll know the theme once you see what I'm going for. But if you'll give me a minute to just divert for a second, let's dip into some dank-ass territories as we talk about the next 3 entries on the list.
Ain't nothing but a G thing, baby. Too low def niggas, so we're crazy.
Like I said on my alternate take review, man, this album's a classic. Well, I feel like Dre does spend a little bit too much time talking about Eazy-E. I feel like when he reins it in and just delivers some good-ass bops, they slap. The production on here, top tier. Some of Dre's best production work. It's G-Funk in some of its rawest forms, because there's a pioneer in that regard. A lot of the sample work is incredible. It's basically Snoop Dogg's audition tape for the whole rap game in general, and anytime he crops up on here, he not only sounds hungry, he fits this production incredibly well. You guys already know what the classics fuck with Dre and Nothing But a G Thing, but a lot of this project is incredible, and a lot of the weed stuff works incredibly well. It's called The Chronic for a reason, and it's definitely worth it for that alone. Yeah. I mean, y'all already know it's The Chronic. It's one of the most highest regarded gangster rap records of all time, and it's some raw-ass gangsta shit, to put it bluntly. Sleep's debut, a fuzzy, druggy, muddy-ass set of riffs with some great grit in the production. Again, similarly to The Chronic, it's a great record to smoke to, if only because a lot of the lyricism and imagery just works so incredibly well and pairs well with some of the dense heaviness on here. Not my favorite Sleep record, but I think Holy Mountain is definitely a great foot for them to step forward with and present just some drug-fueled, hazy-ass, dense riff work with some production that suits it incredibly fucking well. And man, does that fuzz translate incredibly well on Caius's record, Blues for the Red Sun. Man, tracks like 50 Million Year Trip or Green Machine have just some crunchy ass guitar work but I like how their vocals soar within that mix and meld with it incredibly well, and they take the time to just create some slower, softer jams as well that also meld incredibly well with the tight, aggressive riff work that's on here. Some of the spacious moments, like on Apothecary's Wait, really open up the soundscape in a really meaningful way. And a lot of, again, that imagery just works incredibly well for a good smoke sesh. It's a stoner rock classic. They may not be as heavy as Sleep's Holy Mountain, but I feel it comes together a bit better, if only because it's still heavy when it wants to be, but it gives you smoothness to open up the soundscape. And again, just give you a good trip if you're wanting to take it. What the fuck is happening? What? What? Huh. The Prodigy's debut experience. It's an incredible presentation of what the band would continue to perfect across their run in the 90s, but in a really nice genesis. I mean, holy shit. There's a lot of really good, potent energy throughout this thing, like on Your Love, or on the opener Jericho, or on even the Rough in the Jungle business track that has great sample usage woven into that kinetic drum and bass atmosphere, while some of the piano tones, similarly to the Sade project, I could see people being turned away from because they do sound incredibly dated by today's electronic standards. I feel like there's an intrinsic charm that has aged like wine on this project, and even the points where they sort of create a more extended experience, like on Out of Space or on Weather Experience, that creates this overall smoother atmosphere that has sort of movements to it. It's a whole complete dance-driven package. While not their strongest foot forward, it's still an incredible debut for these guys, and I had to put it high up on the list, if only because I have a soft spot for this group, and I think that they came out swinging on experience. Another band I've never really talked about all that much, but I have a lot of love for, especially their early work, Ministry. And Psalm 69, while a record full of excess behind the scenes, the story behind this record is pretty wild, and it definitely feels like a record wrought in excess, similarly to other records you may hear infamously done so within the scene that this band sort of burgeoned from. But Psalm 69 not only sees the band sort of expanding on a lot of the heaviness seen on the previous record, they do so with splendorous fashion. You know, there's a lot of heavy, potent aggression. Hell, Jesus Built My Hot Rod featuring Gibby Haynes from the Butthole Surfers on the vocals feels pretty apt because the overall sonic palette of that track is just grinding and throttling, which is indicative of a lot of the record, whether it's the also cacophonously driven TV2, the more standard paced but still really heavy and potent with noise tracks like NWO or Corrosion or Hero. There's a lot of driving, throttling speed behind this project that I think the band harnesses incredibly well. And even the moments where they sort of open up the soundscape or at least create this more beauty within the noise, like on Psalm 69. It creates this holistic, industrially throttled experience that, again, sort of just expands on pieces of stuff they had toyed with on their much more heavy shift that was the previous record. It's a great expansion, and it's a classic. A lot of people in the scene already love Psalm 69, but it's a record that is a classic for a reason. I really love the record. Again, I've never really talked about Ministry, but I do like Ministry, and I think that on this project they concocted an industrial classic. Like I said in my Beastie Boys discography review, man, this saw them sort of responding to some of the sampling issues they had on Paul's Boutique and made the best with it with some funky-ass instrumentals, some great features, and again, just more vintage, energetic hip-hop with a bunch of dudes that had a lot of camaraderie. You'll notice in the next entry that I totally didn't film prior to this and forgot that I put Check Your Head on this list in general. No, that didn't happen. I think a lot of the best hip-hop from this year came in the source of chemistry. You know, even on The Chronic, Dre and Snoop had some palpable chemistry together. The Beastie Boys still firing off on all cylinders, whether they're laying it back or kicking up the energy with some tracks like Gratitude that have again, like I said in my discography review, a whole bunch of shit going on, like the great funky bass groove, that sort of thunderous drum line with that energy vocally that they had been known for up to that point, you know? They keep it smooth when they want to be, they keep it funky throughout, and they set themselves up to basically pillage forth throughout the 90s and create a sound that may not be exactly like their roots, but expanded upon it in ways that felt like, again, a good response to what was going on at the time. You all already know, I really love this record if you saw my Beastie Boys discography review, but yeah, it's at this point on the list of albums from 1992. Now, like I said on the Pete Rock section, hip-hop was in a weird spot in the early 90s. There was a lot of stuff transitioning. I talked about The Chronic as well, because The Chronic is a classic. But as far as the jazz rap best record in that style, that laid-back style, to me, that came out in 92. It was Bizarre Ride to the Far Side. You know, the four guys in this group had so much fun and camaraderie on this project. The production is super lush. Some of my favorite beats in hip-hop are on this project, like on Passing Me By, or on Pack the Pipe, or on the hypeness on Oh Shit. A lot of the gang vocal stuff that's on here. Even on a track like Other Fish, where it's just one member solo track, the chorus still has that gang feel to it that I think works incredibly well. And I like that even though a lot of this is comedic leaning, like on Ya Mama, which is just a series of Ya Mama jokes, or Weed Rap, like on Pack the Pipe, they do find a way to have this interwoven, you know, discussion of relationships and love, both in comedic, like on Oh Shit, or on parts of On the DL's, you know, hookup-centric lyrics, to more serious stuff, like on Other Fish, or on Passing Me By. You know, two great tracks that see them sort of breaking it down and getting a little more serious, that they would continue to expand upon on their next release, but which is definitely super underrated. But I could see why a lot of people loved this project, especially at the time, because it's a hell of a good time. It's a lot of fun. Even dudes like Tribe that were having a lot of fun on their cuts, they weren't getting this sort of energy out of their jazz rap, and I really appreciate that about this first Far Side record, and I feel like it's a classic for that reason. But everybody in the group is having tight bars, really good flows, and just, again, chemistry for days that is super palpable, and it's just a great, fun, smooth-ass jazz rap record. Selected Ambient Works is regarded as one of the best electronic records of all time, and deservedly so. You know, I love so much of what this record has to present, whether it's the ambient stuff or the kineticism within the ambience. You know, there's even some tracks on here that just have a great build-up within the subtleties, like on that see these soft electronics just coating the mix so perfectly so. You can really feel that some of this work was put together so delicately but passionately at the same time. You know, for all of the frenzied styles that Aphex Twin would be known for later on as his career went on, I like that in his earlier years he just felt like he was a kid making some smooth-ass, chill beats to vibe to. You know, tracks like the opener X-Tal or We Are the Music Makers are like proto PlayStation era menu music. You know, tracks like Helios Fan and Green Calyx with their more propulsive sound feel, again, very forward thinking in that regard. Helios Fan sounds like a melding of like 80s synth dance with what a lot of stuff the people were doing in the 90s without a lot of the breakbeat stuff. You know, this is a beautifully constructed record, and so lo-fi in the best way possible. You know, I feel like artists like Against All Logic really feel like they're trying to tap into the same vibe that this project is putting out, but it's deservedly so. This thing, while it could easily feel like a hodgepodge of ideas strewn across a myriad of tracks, it comes together so perfectly on this album, and it's a true calm, serene experience to give you just maximum vibes. I mean, full stop. This record is a classic. This was the album where Patton got to get a little more Patton-y with Faith No More. You know, they had their Faith No More style cuts, like Caffeine and Midlife Crisis and Smaller, but I mean, the cheerleader chanting on Be Aggressive, the piano stuff on RV, or the weirder groove on Everything's Ruined just feel like Patton, you know, injecting a little more of his Pattonisms into the group. He also just gets to be himself more. His vocal work on here is much more showing off his abilities in the best way possible. You know, Jizzlobber is an incredible 6-minute tune that sees them just being goofy, being weird, but in a very Patton-esque way. Even any moments where Patton gets to just creep in his style a little more, you can feel it creeping into Faith No More. You know, where they had their funkisms still present at points. A lot of that was still slowly creeping into the background, while Mike Patton just continued to encroach in his own melding of the two worlds. The guitars still got a good bite. They still have that vintage sound that suited their earlier work incredibly well. It's just a little bit more forward into the realms of weirdness that the band does incredibly well. You know, it's incredible that Faith No More still was super good at putting together hooks or throttling a sound that would still be different from anything else Mike Patton might have been doing at the time. But it's at the point where he got to rein himself in while still introducing some weirdness into a more standard rock form. And I feel like the band here adapts incredibly well. The drums on here, still very traveling and propelling in their own, again, very Faith No More style. Again, the piano tones, while at some point sounding very vintage, suit a lot of the vibes that they're going for on this project. It's a great, again, meeting of the minds in a way that sees, you know, the band finding a personality more so their own outside of the funk metal scene that they sort of burgeoned from. You know, the Bill and Ted rock moniker that was thrown on the band for their early work definitely felt like it was shed throughout a lot of this project. And I love it for that. Don't get me wrong. I love The Real Thing a hell of a lot. And you'll come to find that out if I ever do a Faith No More discography review. But I really appreciate Angel Dust for giving the band legs where they could have easily fallen to the wayside like a lot of their contemporaries from that scene that weren't Primus.
Anger is a gift.
You guys could have guessed this was going to be here because it's a record that I've talked about a couple of times as being one of my favorites of all time, and I love this band for what they've contributed to aggressive-leaning music. But Rage Against the Machine's debut is easily one of the best produced records I've ever heard as far as like production is considered. Everything is tight, everything has a pocket, and everything sits in his pocket and throttles it on 10. I love the bass and drum relationship on this project. The guitar grooves and the guitar riff work is insane on here. Zach sounds as angry as he does throughout their entire catalog. A lot of the screaming on here is raw as fuck. And again, super politically charged lyrics that are blunt as hell. Again, I've talked about this record a handful of times on the internet. It's one of my favorites of all time. You probably could have expected it to be here. But here's me gushing about it a little more. I love everything this band had going for on this project. The hooks on here, still super catchy, even if they're in the much more bare-bones sense. A lot of the subject matter still feels pertinent to this day. Killing in the Name of is something people still shout at the rafters at people because it's such a simple, it's such a simply constructed message delivered in the most potent fashion. And that's really how most of this record feels. Simply delivered, politically charged lyrics with such potent passion for people to latch onto and carry into the streets. It's the best form of modern protest music that exists. It's fucking perfect. And that's going to be my list. What did you think about it? Did you like my selections for the best albums on 1992? Did you not? Let me know your favorites from this year in the comments down below. If you did like this list, be sure to give it a like. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and general notary content, be sure to subscribe. Special thanks to my patrons if you want to join their ranks to get early access to content, exclusive content, or to help drive the community. It's linked in the description. I'm going to get out of here, though. Thank you so very much again for watching. I have been Val Rack. You guys have good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day. DiGiorno. Bye-bye, y'all. Goodbye.